I'd like to welcome everybody here to the committee meeting. Are there any members on WebEx? Mr. Chair. All right, thank you. Is there any request for any bills?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Laura Lutz with Government Affairs, and on behalf of Evergy, I'm requesting bill introduction. The RS number is 2834, and it is regarding retaining coal-fired generation facilities for capacity purposes.
Any questions on that? Okay, it's introduced. Thank you. Is there anyone else? Okay. We got two presentations today. The first one is on robocalls. So that's something that we're all interested in. So Fran is Oline, am I saying that right? Okay. Deputy Attorney General for Public Protection Division. Fran, welcome to committee.
Thank you. I appreciate. Thank you. Okay. Thank you for inviting me. I'll start again. We talked about robocalls last session, and I'm here to testify a little bit about how we're doing and what's going on. The good news is the number of robocalls is reducing, the problematic ones. The bad news is, of course, there are still problematic scam calls and otherwise bothersome robocalls coming into our citizens. Now, what we have seen, if you see in my testimony on the top of the second page, we are seeing a very significant decrease in the number of complaints from Kansans about robocalls. So that is, we're very happy about that. One of the reasons for that is the federal regulations have tightened, and that's really, as we talked before, the federal regulations are where a lot of this regulation needs to happen because they have the technology and they have the infrastructure to keep those calls from coming in the first place. And Kansas doesn't have as much authority over those calls, whether they are robocalls or otherwise. Specifically, I was asked to take a look at a proposed law in New Jersey. And New Jersey is considering a law that would make the violation of their telemarketer sales rule, their telemarketing act, a misdemeanor, essentially. They call it a person, they call it something different, but it is a misdemeanor. They also have a number of things that the telemarketer has to disclose within the first 30 seconds of the call. We don't have that. Interestingly, the New Jersey law requires the telemarketers to evaluate their list against the do not call list every 3 months. Kansas law requires telemarketers to do that every 30 days. So we actually have a stronger law there, and we would like to keep it that way. The other difference is some of the information that telemarketers are required to put on the website and to disclose during the call, not necessarily in the first 30 seconds. So the New Jersey law would be more strict in that arena. That said, I'm open for questions as far as the Kansas law, how anything's going, and our evaluation of the New Jersey statute.
Committee, you have any questions?
We haven't had very many calls about the auto warranty, right? That's reduced. They think it's reduced by like 90%, so that's good.
So what kind of information, Fran, are they looking for in the first 30 seconds?
So in the first 30 seconds in New Jersey, the telemarketer has to give I've got it in my testimony here, I'll point you to it. If you look on almost the next to last paragraph on the second page, they have to say the telemarketer's name, their name and telephone number on whose behalf they're calling. And also, they have to give those two pieces of information on the website. So the name and on whose behalf they are calling. And that is the misdemeanor in New Jersey, or if that bill goes through, that will be the misdemeanor. And the issue I see with that, if we were to have that rule, we're not going to extradite anyone for a misdemeanor. So I don't know how many telemarketers New Jersey has versus how many we have, but if we found a violation and it was a telemarketer in New Jersey, we're not going to extradite them to Kansas to prosecute them. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. No county or district attorney is going to do that. And the other issue is a lot of proof. I mean, that crime, we're going to have a lot of documentation and proof of phone calls and call logs. And again, it may not be worth it for a prosecutor to go through that much work for a misdemeanor. And then that's a telemarketer, maybe not the telemarketing entity, so the company. So maybe they fire that telemarketer and they just hire another telemarketer next time. So I applaud their effort, and it's always nice to have enforcement tools. I'm not sure that one's going to be real effective for them. I'll be interested to see.
Committee have any questions? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for coming. It was actually one of my constituents that wanted to know what we were doing and sent me the signed bill,
Oh, nice.
bill as an example, so I appreciate the chair and the committee and you for updating us on this issue.
Sure.
So I am over 65, but I didn't have to enroll in Medicare because I'm still working for the state.
Okay.
But I do get a lot of calls about, I could get this free, do you have back pain? You know, questions about my health. So, and another concern I have just with these robocalls is if I were under Medicare, I think they're trying to convince me it wouldn't cost me anything to enroll in that program. So would having the name, and if I could provide a name of a company to the Attorney General, would you be able then to not necessarily talk to them about the robocalls, but talk to them about, is there a problem with marketing and soliciting individuals who aren't going to their doctor and are just saying, oh, it's free, I might as well try this?
And I appreciate you bringing this up because that is the #1 type of unwanted solicitation calls that we get complaints about, is medical devices, medical insurance, medical supplemental insurance. And in Kansas, a protected consumer, so enhanced penalties apply in the Consumer Protection Act. If the person, they actually say elderly, I really don't like that word, but it's if you're 60 or older. So we can have enhanced penalties if it is a violation of the Consumer Protection Act. Now, in theory, that information would be good. It could potentially help us not have to investigate so far, you know, so if they were truthful about what company it was, and if we didn't have 5 shell companies to sort through, that could save us some time. So am I saying that that's a good addition? It could be. I don't know how effective it would be, but it's not going to hurt for sure. What we find is, you know, those people are shell corporations, they're scams anyway. I mean, so whether they're going to be truthful when they give you that information or not, I don't know. Potentially that could be helpful. I don't think it would be a detriment for sure.
Do you expect anything to come out of the Joint Anti-Robocall Task Force as recommendations?
As recommendations, we will have recommendations, and I think I put it in my testimony. We actually, that task force, we filed a suit against a company called Avid, and I put some of the information in my testimony about that. We filed it last fall. So it is helpful. That's one of the things that working with other states is really important because, like a lot of things, it crosses state lines. So I haven't seen any recommendations. Right now, it's a task force to try and do enforcement.
Any other questions? I've got a couple here.
Okay.
How many complaints did you have last year? Do you keep record of that?
Complaints about robocalls?
Yeah.
If you look at the top of the second page, last year we had 16,095. Those are the ones reported to the Federal Trade Commission. Into our office, we had 230. So what happens is when people complain to our office, we ask them to also complain to the Federal Trade Commission and the Federal Communications Commission. Some people just go straight there and don't file with us. So that's why those numbers are so drastically different.
Fran, do you give them like the phone number or how to do that whenever they complain to you to kind of help them out with making sure they follow through on that?
The Federal Trade Commission and Federal Communications Commission has asked us to just give them the information. We used to just file it for them, and they've asked us not to do that anymore, but we do absolutely give them all the information they need to pretty easily file that.
Okay. You know, when you was talking about how hard it is to do it and then what can you really do about it? Is there anything we could do monetarily? And what I mean by that is, let's say you make a list of these people and all of a sudden this guy's showing up and it is a company. If somebody was to call that company and say, do you realize that it's going to cost you $10,000 if you don't stop this?
And we
And-
do
you do
have
that
that
kind of
enforcement authority. One of the larger areas also, in addition to the Medicaid and insurance, is insurance agents who don't scrub their list for the no call often enough. And so we do some education in that way. If we get that complaint, we try to work with them. And trust me, we tell them what the potential penalties will be because every phone call is a new violation. So it could be $10,000 every time they pick up the phone. So.
And many times they keep doing it anyway, or does that usually slow it down?
For the legitimate insurance agents, our experience has been it was a mistake and they comply. With some of these companies, like we talked about before, the best thing I can tell anyone about these calls is to get with your phone company. They have these blockers, unknown numbers go straight to your voicemail. You can just don't answer the phone. If they're legitimate, they're gonna leave a message. And I know that's bothersome. I know when the doctor calls, I always want to pick up because they're so hard to get a hold of. But the best way to keep your number off of those lists is to not even pick up. A lot of people like to pick up and then hang up on them, but then they verify that that's a legitimate number. So that's what we tell people is just kind of be like a teenager and don't answer your phone, and just return calls, right? Or text people. We are seeing some increase in robo-texts. Those are a little tougher for us to prevent. But if we can find the violator, it just takes a lot of person power, if you will. It takes a lot of time to sort that through. And then, the penalties are so helpful. They do deter legitimate companies. But if these companies go bankrupt, we can't get the money from them. They go bankrupt and then they just reform in a different name. So there's tricks that they use to avoid it.
So is there any new laws that we could help you with the problem?
I haven't specifically asked for that. As I told you before, we can always use more people. We get about 4,000 complaints a year in my division just for consumer protection. We still answer the phone. I don't know any other government agency that answers the phone with a real live person. We will help you with your question. We will give you advice on whether this is a scam or not. That takes a lot of personnel time. It's really hard to find people who want to talk to unhappy people on the phone. So more staff and more money in that way is always helpful. We are looking at some of the consumer protection, acts that other states do. We always look at that. So increasing our budget is always good. I appreciate it. I would like to, because I have 10 seconds, I would like to point out our staff is very dedicated. They really love what they do. I brought Assistant Attorney General Chris Teeters with me again. He's one of our experts, and you might know him as the opioids czar. He's the one that got all the money for Kansas. I call him the $3 million man because Kansas decided not to use outside counsel to do the opioids, the opioids lawsuits. And had we gotten outside counsel, their fee would have been about $3 million. So maybe an increase in Chris's pay, I don't know, would be helpful. But our staff really does enjoy working with consumers and trying to help them. And I want to emphasize that in our view, consumer education, getting consumers to know what they should and shouldn't, invest their money in is really key. We're seeing a lot of virtual currency cases right now. And if you think robocalls are hard to track down, try some cryptocurrency. So,
Senator Francisco?
Thank you, and thank you for coming again back to the committee. So I'm probably going to still answer my phone because
I understand.
I want people to feel like
Yes.
call
yes.
their legislature, I'm going to answer it. But
Makes sense.
what kind of information, and maybe this is something you could send the committee in a memo, if someone wants to file a complaint about a robocall or another complaint, what would be the procedure?
Yes.
And I would like to put that in a newsletter to tell
Yes.
my constituents, here's the process. So that probably would be better if you could provide that to our committee secretary.
Sure.
But if you want to say something real quick, if somebody's
be happy
watching,
to.
they would know?
Again, we answer the phone. Our number is 785-296-3751. And a live person will answer your call. And if they're busy, we will call you back. We have a complaint form on our website. They can fill it out. If they don't want to do that, they can print that complaint form and fill it out and bring it to us. Or send it to us. They can fax us. We mail out complaint forms to folks. We can't help them fill it out, but we can sit there if they really, really are struggling. We will literally sit at the table in the lobby and explain to them how to fill it out. And they bring all the documentation they can. So I would suggest if they just are really lost, they can just call 296-3751 and we'll walk them through it. We'll tell them exactly where to go on our website. I'll put together some of our, basic information about how to file a complaint, some of our basic advice to consumers, kind of maybe some of that, and send it to the committee. And then, it's great information to put in newsletters. We also have kind of a speakers bureau. If your constituents have, we especially like to go to, groups, clubs. If our schedule allows, we go all over the state. Recently we had a good result of one of those. We were talking to a bankers association, and they deal with customers all the time who are being scammed, and they want to transfer money from one place to another. And that resulted in that banker calling our office, and we were able to talk that consumer through why that was not a good transaction. So we really, really want to focus on consumer education. So any of your groups, clubs, investing groups, whatever, we're available to speak anytime we can.
Thank you. So what kind of information should I be able to provide to the office if I've gotten one of these calls and
Really, a lot of them, all we have is the phone number. So if the person, most of us have caller ID, if they just get the phone number, that's enough. And it was, tell us what the call was about. Did you not hear anything when you answered? Did the person try to pitch, whatever? Are you on the do not call list? We can walk people through how to do that too. I'll put that in the information that I give to the committee. But yeah, a lot of, Chris and I were looking at our cases before we came over, and I was like, Chris, a lot of these just have a phone number. That's all we have. And then we do the research from there.
Any other questions? Fran, one suggestion I might have too, if you had less a one-page thing, you said, do not answer the phone. You know, if you had an older person, that we had something, a one-pager that says the do's and don'ts of how to handle your phone calls, just a suggestion.
Yes, be happy to.
Yeah. Anything else?
Thank you again. I
Hey, thank
appreciate
you
the
for the
invitation. It's
presentation.
always good to see you.
Thank you for coming over.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have a presentation on transmission cost allocations. We got Bill Dowling, VP of Engineering and Energy Supply, Midwest Energy. Bill, welcome to Community.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to come and visit with you a little bit about transmission cost allocation. If you don't mind, I might just ask whether we have a particular time limit you'd like me to be respectful of?
We have to leave here by 25 after,
Oh, no problem.
yeah,
I could talk longer, but I won't.
or before, yeah. Okay.
Okay. And also to be respectful of your time, I do have a few slides that will come across during my presentation that I may say something about them, but I'm not going to go into detail on them. But you'll have the full slide presentation for reference after the fact. I think, as most of you know, Midwest Energy is a member-owned cooperative. We serve about 50,000 electric customers and 42,000 gas customers in central and western Kansas. Specific to what I'm going to talk about today, we operate over 900 miles of transmission in voltages ranging from 69 to 230 kV. We own some generation. We purchase others through contract, all that to serve about a 350 megawatt firm obligation for our customers. It's noteworthy, by the way, and I need to advance my slides here. Whoops, forgot to turn it on. There we go. It's noteworthy that our transmission system spans the full length of our system, all the way from basically the Hutchinson area up to the northwest corner of Kansas. And of course, that transmission system is what delivers energy to load, and it's what also collects energy and moves it elsewhere. So today, we're going to lay a foundation that for three important takeaways that I hope we get a chance to talk about. First, our transmission system is now required to do more things than just deliver energy to local load. The second thing is we have a pair of disjointed SPP processes that play a strong role in how the costs of regional transmission, and particularly expansion, are allocated to transmission owners and ultimately to our customers. And finally, we believe there's a mismatch there between the way costs are allocated and how customers can benefit from transmission expansion. So particularly in western Kansas, the transmission system that was originally intended to deliver energy to local load is now also asked to export that energy at least outside our zone, and in some cases even outside of Kansas. Midwest Energy has seen a lot of growth in the amount of generation on our transmission system, and a good part of that is wind energy. And the amount of generating capacity now connected to our system is nearly triple that of our average monthly peak load. So we've got a lot of wind sitting out there. The next three slides may look familiar if you were a participant in the interim committee meetings last fall between the Joint Senate and House Utilities. And so we're just going to hit these really quickly. At a high level, this first slide shows the transmission freeway, if we can call it that, largely used for moving energy to load, and that's how it was originally designed. The second slide, number 7, shows what happens with the amount of generation on the left, which I'm going to think of as the west, continuing to grow in western Kansas, but it's hitting a constraint. And once it hits that constraint, not everything can squeeze through. And then finally, this version shows how that constraint has been removed, effectively by adding more lanes. And now all that generation can get through and make its way to serve load. So as you can see from this slide, the amount of wind energy produced in Kansas has grown significantly since 2001. If you look at the pending requests in the SPP generator interconnection queue, you'll note there's 120 new projects seeking to connect just in Kansas. And of those Kansas requests that are pending, 46 of them are asking to connect to the byway portion of the transmission system, that being that part that operates at 300 kV or less. And that could bring over 6,000 megawatts, new megawatts, to the byway systems throughout the state of Kansas. From there, you can see the number of requests that are seeking to connect to the byway system in western Kansas, Midwest and Sunflower, essentially, transmission systems. Now, it's difficult to predict how many of these requests will actually achieve commercial operation, but historically, roughly 40% have actually been built and entered service. So this begs the question, how much new transmission is going to be required to support additional generation in Kansas? Well, the ongoing 2024 Integrated Transmission Planning Process, or ITP as we refer to it, will endeavor to answer that question, at least in part, as it includes a portion of the projects that are in the generator interconnection queue. However, a recent quarterly update on the 2024 ITP that's currently underway does provide some insight on this by looking at the amount of hours across all the pricing nodes in the regional energy market that may experience negative pricing. And that is a proxy for congestion on the transmission system. And to see that, just compare the red and the green lines on that chart there. As noted in the upper right corner on this same display, which is now half covered up by my face, the negative locational marginal price, or LMP, likely occurs when the market dispatch system tries to signal a generator to reduce production by decreasing the value of that energy in the market. Sometimes the LMP has to go negative before the generator finds it economical to reduce energy production. Now, it'll be later this year before we see a final portfolio of recommended transmission expansion projects out of that 2024 version of the Integrated Transmission Plan. While a portion of those pending requests are seeking to connect at voltages below 300 kV, or again on the byway system, even the new generation that connects to the 345 kV system in Kansas can, and often does, have an impact on the lower voltage transmission network as well. Either way, the increasing curtailment can be addressed by expanding the capabilities of the transmission network. Now, it's the regional planning process that's intended to provide the recommendations as to where that transmission expansion should take place. Well, let's talk a little bit more about that planning process, and specifically transmission planning and generator interconnection analysis. Now, these two processes, they do operate in parallel, but they're also independent of each other, and they have differing objectives and differing cost allocation methodologies that are attached. The transmission planning process focuses primarily on two areas. We talk about sufficiency, or the reliability of the system, and we look for things like voltage excursions and overloads. On the efficiency side of the network, we talk about, are we able to deliver energy to the load efficiently? And that efficiency is often measured by determining the difference in the overall cost of energy production between the existing system and some proposed system with modifications. The so-called economic projects are intended to mitigate some of those congestion issues on the transmission network and let more of that energy flow to load. Generator interconnection analysis is somewhat different. The objective here is to determine whether a proposed generator addition can be connected at a specific point in the network and what facilities must be built or upgraded to accommodate that new generation at that point. It does not directly consider network capability to continually deliver a generator's output to remote loads all across the grid. So now let's go into a little more detail on cost allocation. Whoops, I think I hit two of them there. Nope, we're good. So we're going to focus on the highway-byway cost methodology. We're actually a little behind here. We're going to focus on the highway-byway methodology as it applies to projects generally arising from the integrated transmission planning process. And these cost allocation formulas are utilized based on voltage. So if a project is going to operate at 300 kV or above, then it's a highway project, and that project is going to have its costs allocated across the entire region. On the other hand, if the project is between 300 kV down to 100 kV, that's a byway project, and 2/3 of the cost of that project is going to be assigned to the zone in which the project is scheduled to be constructed, with the remaining 1/3 spread across the entire SPP region. And then if a project is below 100 kV, that's 100% funded by the local zone. Now, the highway-byway cost allocation is significant for what we're talking about here today, as it lies at the heart of the mismatch between cost allocation and the benefits received that we're going to discuss here in just a minute. So, with respect to generator interconnection requests, I have to make sure these slides are advancing, or if my thumb works. With respect to generator interconnection requests that require new facilities and perhaps network upgrades so the generator can be connected and inject power into the grid, those costs are assigned directly to the generator. But it is noteworthy that the interconnection analysis does not test specifically for congestion that may occur elsewhere and thereby limit the production of those facilities. So that brings us to the crux of the problem. To build the entire story, let's take it one step at a time. Transmission owners do receive revenue from loads for the use of the transmission system, but that revenue stays in the zone where the load is located. That load could be in the same zone, it could be in an adjacent zone, it could be in another state. That means that when the generation providing energy that flows to the load is located in a zone remote from the load, the transmission that moves that energy out of the generation zone is not compensated for the use of that transmission. If a constraint is determined to be limiting the energy production in a zone with generation, and that zone is required to construct facilities to relieve that constraint, then the objective of that construction is to reduce the cost of energy in the remote load zone by providing access to lower cost energy. The benefit of relieving that constraint is measured in large part by the reduction of the cost of energy computed across the entire SPP region. And just as a reminder, that capital investment in transmission assets is ultimately recovered from the customers in that zone. So, is it fair to ask, is this a reasonable outcome? This, what I'm saying, is a mismatch between costs that are charged and benefits. So to answer that question, let's look at order number 1000 issued by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in 2011. That order included 6 principles that the FERC set forth relative to cost allocation, and we're going to look at just the first 2 of those principles that are relevant to our conversation today. The first one said, to paraphrase it down, that the cost of transmission facilities must be allocated to those that benefit from those facilities, at least roughly commensurate with estimated benefits. They ought to match up. They went on to say in the second principle that those that receive no benefit must not be involuntarily allocated any of the costs of those transmission facilities. So what does this all mean? Well, it means in some cases that transmission owners like Midwest Energy will export energy and will export benefits, but we still retain the costs for our customers to cover. Consider that customers in that zone will still have to cover the cost of maintenance and the replacement of assets that have reached the end of their useful life. And if the load in that zone grows, particularly with new, larger customers, those original customers in that zone may have to pay to increase the capacity of the local transmission system, knowing that other generators took advantage of what was unused capacity that had been paid for previously by those same customers in the zone. And on top of all of that, there can be a mismatch between the entity paying the cost of the transmission expansion compared to the recipient of the benefits, because if the transmission that relieved the constraint is operated at or below 300 kV, then 2/3 of the cost of that economic project to remove that constraint is going to be assigned in that zone. Now, that generation often does not benefit, that generation zone, I should say, does not always benefit from the regional reduction in energy cost. And in fact, the generation zone may see an increase in energy costs because there are now fewer hours in which the generator that was behind a constraint operated at a negative LMP price. And keep in mind, when we talk about a negative LMP, that means the generator is paying to be able to generate. So in short, the constructing transmission zone may actually see an increase in energy prices in their zone after they pay to relieve that constraint. So as evidence of how this mismatch between that comes up in this kind of a situation, look at the charts that are up here. We've got these two charts, one based on zones, one based on states. And if you'll study those a little bit, they're based on the computation of various expected benefits in an ITP study. And this is from the 2023 ITP, which is now complete. Projects have been recommended for construction, and they're moving forward. And the estimated costs of those projects when they are finally completed. Now, in each chart, the left-hand vertical axis depicts the benefit or positive value, or the detriment, a negative benefit. And then the right-hand axis shows the cumulative number of hours of negative LMP prices across all pricing zones in SPP based on these analysis models. And remember that I said that that negative pricing was a proxy for constraint situations. So if you look at the chart on the left, it's talking about benefits and costs by zone. You'll note that the benefits to both Midwest and Sunflower there on the dark colored line are the lowest across the entire region. For Midwest, that benefit to cost ratio was a minus 21.7. For Sunflower, it was a minus 11.6. Those are the worst of any of the zones in SPP by far. And on top of that, Midwest Energy wasn't direct to build any projects, so the only cost we had was rising energy costs. And remember, that means that benefits are negative and our customers are going to be paying more for energy. Now, if you compare the benefit cost ratio for SPP as a whole, it's 5.6. That's the dashed line going across there. Obviously, a few zones are below that, and Midwest and Sunflower are well below that. And it's that regional benefit, that cost-to-benefit ratio, that's used to determine the economic viability of the portfolio of projects that are going to be constructed as recommended in an integrated transmission plan. As a second point of reference, look at the chart on the right side, and it shows the benefit to cost ratio for Kansas compared to other states in the SPP. Kansas has the only negative benefit to cost ratio at a negative 0.4. And again, for SPP as a whole, it's 5.6. And then finally, note on the bottom there in the yellow, the rate impact on a typical residential customer. From this project portfolio, out of the 2023 ITP, it was anticipated that Kansans would see an overall increase in rates for an average residential customer. All the other states are going to see a decrease as their benefit for the construction, and the SPP average is almost as big a benefit to SPP as a whole as it is a detriment to Kansas customers. So there's something amiss here. So where do we go from here? Well, we talked about our concerns with the current cost allocation methodology and the challenges it presents. But what are the next steps? What are companies like Midwest Energy that share similar concerns doing about it? We believe the preferred solution is one that's developed by the SPP stakeholders with support of SPP staff. And that solution should apply to the entire region. Now, there's challenges to the regional planning process that could provide the desired relief if all the pieces fall into place. But those changes could be beneficial to us. But I do want to provide a cautionary note here. There is no quick fix about this. It's going to take time, but there are a number of process changes being discussed in various groups at SPP that have the potential to bring beneficial changes to the cost allocation piece of this. In fact, we've already cleared the first step in that process at the quarterly meetings earlier in January, and we're expecting the next step to be discussed and advanced at the April meetings. So we feel like we're making progress. And by the end of the year, we hope to see proposals approved to realign the pricing zones to be consistent with what we've already approved as the wider delivery zones. And in the case of the SPP, instead of there being 17 pricing zones, there's going to be 3 delivery zones. And that is going to be part of the fix for the cost allocation process. After that, there's several other things that are going to happen. We hope that by the first quarter of '25, that the new consolidated planning process will start to phase in, and it'll replace the current multiple independent processes that we have going on right now. And hopefully all of that is then going to culminate in a change to the cost allocation methodologies that'll relieve this mismatch I've been talking about. And we hope to have that in place no later than the end of '26 and hopefully sooner than that. Yes, it's going to take some time, but a regional solution is always a challenge to develop and to obtain broad support so that you can put it in place. And with that, that is the things I wanted to tell you about today. On behalf of Midwest, I do appreciate the opportunity to address the Committee on Utilities, and I do stand ready to answer any questions and participate in any discussions at your pleasure. I will note that I did provide my contact information on the slide, and if you'd like any additional information, feel free to contact me. And with that, I'd welcome any questions.
Okay, Bill, thank you very much. Informative presentation. Committee, we got any questions that we'd like to ask him at this point? You do? Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize for coming in late to the presentation. I was testifying in another committee. Thank you very much for the information, and some of this is what we heard in the interim committee over the summer, so thank you for keeping us updated on these issues. Can you tell us how much energy is currently generated in Kansas that moves out of state? That'd be my first question.
Sadly, a bit of a difficult question for me to answer. We have pulled some numbers from some different sources, primarily the Energy Information Administration, which is part of the U.S. Department of Energy, but not every utility, not every generator is required to report to that. Similarly, the KCC pulls together some numbers, but there are certain generating entities over which they do not have jurisdiction. So I've seen some numbers, and the same is true basically of load, to compare generation to load, and obviously if you generate more than your load, it's going somewhere else. The numbers that I have seen do indicate that Kansas is very much a net exporter of energy to other states. Not every state in the Southwest Power Pool region is an exporter. Kansas is blessed with a good wind resource, but a fair amount of that is leaving Kansas.
So a follow-up question, if I may, Mr. Chair. So what can the Kansas legislature do to assure Kansas ratepayers that you, the Kansas ratepayer, aren't funding energy being delivered out of state? You've said we're a net exporter. Are Kansas ratepayers funding that?
Well, to some extent they are, and again, I'll reflect back on the situation where some of that energy is moving at the so-called byway system, where the costs are being allocated to the zone that had to build the relief to that constraint that allowed more of it to flow out of the state. And if those two aren't matched, and they aren't right now because the costs go to a zone, but the benefits are spread across the entire SPP region. I think to get an even better handle on that, one of the first steps is to have perhaps both SPP and the Kansas Commission get together, perhaps address one or more committees here at the legislature and provide some more information on those numbers and some of the hurdles to fleshing out those numbers. Generally speaking, the SPP is going to have all the numbers we would need. I generally do not have access to that because Midwest Energy is a market participant and that data is considered to be confidential. What it might take to get that information, perhaps in a purely consolidated matter, is a question that probably only SPP can answer.
Thank you. That would probably lead to some more questions for SPP because, you know, in your answer and your presentation, more than once you've said, you know, Kansans are paying here for something that helps all of SPP, but it's not necessarily maybe a net benefit here. But thank you for the answers, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for the question.
Any other questions? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for putting this presentation together. I think it's even a little easier to understand than some of what we heard in the interim committee.
I hope so. Thank you.
And also that you have some opportunities for those next steps, because we were just talking about what was happening with FERC and the ruling. So you said, and if I heard correctly, that they were talking about maybe having 3 delivery areas?
That is the current plan. Conceptually, it's been improved by the all-member committee. So that was the first step.
Can you describe those areas?
Yeah, so the one that we would be in is largely all of Kansas and a little bit of Missouri along the border between Kansas and Missouri, where we've got utilities like Liberty that work on both sides of the state line. Then there's a south zone that is a little bit of Arkansas, all of Oklahoma, and North Texas. And then the north zone would be Nebraska, the Dakotas, a little bit of Wyoming and Montana, and a very little piece of Minnesota and Iowa.
And how, so I'm hearing that Kansas might be on its own because of the amount that we're generating, or?
I wouldn't call it on its own. One of the advantages of the deliverability zone is actually intended to help new generation connect more quickly. And just as a side note right now, if you're a new generator and you want to go to SPP and try to get connected, that study process is bogged down. We're still trying to study the requests that were submitted in 2021. And so it's a lengthy multi-year process. The first advantage of the deliverability zones are going to be that if you put a generator in a zone and you want to deliver to load in that same zone, it does not require that exhaustive study. It's presumed to be deliverable. The second piece of that, where it's going to potentially help cost allocation, is if we start allocating costs, particularly for these so-called economic projects, not just in the Midwest zone or another zone, but across that entire deliverability zone. That will make a difference.
Any other questions? Yes, Senator Bauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just for the record, Senate District 36 does cover Midwest Energy, and
Yes.
Bill and I have been friends for 3 decades plus, so it's good to see you here, and very nice job.
Likewise, thank you.
What's coming? How much more transmission, more energy generated? What can we see in the future, do you think?
Well, standing here today, it's a little hard to say. Again, I was trying to give you just a little bit of insight in terms of the amount of congestion that they're seeing. And if you think back to that chart, and I can probably get back to that whoops, can we have the charts back? On this one, again, the difference between the red and the green line is the amount of increase in the amount of time that there is congestion in the network. And it has increased substantially from the studies they did just a couple of years ago. So that foretells to some extent that there's going to have to be more congestion solutions provided. Now, the next shoe that's going to drop in about mid-February is what's called a needs list that'll come out of this current 2024 ITP. Now, that's not going to list specific lines that are going to be built, but it's going to identify needs or problem areas. And then the way it works in the SPP is utilities, independent transmission constructors, and the SPP staff will then start proposing solutions. There's a 30-day window there in which solutions can be proposed, and then SPP will go back and start studying those solutions, trying to find the right combination of the best solutions to solve the problems that they're trying to solve, be it reliability, economic, or both. Does that answer it? I wish I had a better answer, but not yet.
Any other questions? Bill, I might ask you, when you look at FERC, if I understand this right, there was a board appointment or a commission appointment that was being hung up. That was kind of a problem. Has there been any progress on that?
At the FERC?
Yes.
Not that I'm aware of. As far as I know, unless something's happened in the last couple of days, we're still down to 3 commissioners instead of the full 5. And so, you know, if nothing else, you're missing a little bit of diversity of opinion there. If there would happen to be a situation where a commissioner, for example, would have to recuse themselves for some reason, now you're down to 2 commissioners. You could have a split and no decision.
Has there been a lot of, and I know our senators have been behind this and a lot of people, has there been a lot of letters sent to whoever appoints them, which is probably the president?
It comes from the president, yes, and his advisors.
Yeah, so probably the more letters, the better, to let them know we got a problem that they need to correct.
My answer to that would be it certainly can't hurt. I know some of the Kansas congressional delegation has written letters like that, and we're still waiting.
How long has it been 3 members?
In reality, since the end of the year, there was a commissioner who knew that his term was going to end, and it actually ended last summer, but he could remain in office until that session of Congress adjourned for the year at the end of December, at which point he was no longer a member of the commission. So that's when we actually went down to 3 members. We had 4 for better than a year.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, if not, Bill, thank you for coming. Enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Is there any announcements or committee information at this point? If not, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.